pray. Jesus, it just seems like each of the services this morning, we've had a special word for different people. It seems like, Lord, what you want to do in this service is unique. And you know where each person is at. So we just pray, Holy Spirit, by your grace, may faith arise in our hearts. May faith arise in this place. We trust in you, Jesus, to do your work. We just yield ourselves to you and we humble ourselves under your mighty hand. Lift us up in your time, Lord. And even in this service, lift us up. Amen. Well, good morning. Happy Palm Sunday. It seems like if a friend or a coworker or maybe a family member were to describe you, they would say one word that would describe this person is that they're ambitious. They like to get things done. They don't want to start the day and then end the day without having really accomplished much of anything. In fact, if somebody was to describe you, they would not only describe you as a person of ambition, but maybe even a person of vision, that you like to see what the possibilities are, what could be done. And what keeps you up late at night is thinking about the future, thinking about the potential. And so as you're thinking about vision, what comes to mind is what are the defining objectives that need to happen? What are the big things that we need to tackle? And then under the defining objectives, you're thinking about strategies. How can we align this stuff? How can we actually execute what we've set out to do? And then under the strategies, there's tactics. And with the tactics and the strategies, there's people that are assigned to those particular strategies with due dates. And you love due dates because that means that progress is happening because you just love progress. You're all about the key performance indicators. You love the KPIs. Admit it. Who loves KPIs? Raise your, no, you don't have to raise your, okay, yeah. You love KPIs. You love the ROIs, the return on the investments, because there's something about you that likes to see things happen. You like progress. And maybe that doesn't define you because you don't feel like, well, I'm just not an A-type personality. I'm not an adult. You know, I tell you what, this can happen to children, youth. You know, there's some people in here that might say, you know what, I know what my college is. I know what my career path is. I know where I want to live, what I want to do. I know what I want to do by the time I'm 40, 50, 60, 70. And the parents are like saying, chill out. Just enjoy kindergarten. Just relax a little bit. It's okay. But again, even if you're not an A-type personality, there's something in us that loves to see progress. If you love to garden, you plant the seed in there with the understanding, the anticipation that something's going to come out of the ground. If you're an artist, you look at a blank canvas and you think to yourself, what could be? If you work with pottery or you work with poems and you're a poet, you look at a blank sheet of paper and you put to the rhyme and the meter and you just love to bring things out into the open. Because there's something about all of us here in this room that we love progress. There's something in us that takes something of scratch and makes a difference in the world. The good news is the reason why there's an ambition within our hearts, a desire to get things done, is because that's something of God in us. Because we have been created in the image of God. And God is about progress. I mean, you think about it. I mean, he created things in 6 days. That's pretty impressive. I mean, that's a good week of work. You think about his ROI, return on investment. He started with nothing and created everything. That's a great return on the investment. And there's something in all of us as we've been created in the image of God that likes progress. And that's a good thing. But the problem is that for some of us, and if we could tell our story, we would say that the biggest hurt and pain in our life is that we worked for somebody that used their power, used their influence, and had a desire for progress. And they trampled all over people. They used people, didn't serve people. They used their power in such a way that just ran over, roughshod anybody that got in their way. And if you would look back in your history, and whether it's in school or whether it's in your workforce, that the greatest pain, the greatest hurt in your life is the misuse of power from somebody that was in authority over you. And maybe that is you. And you recognize that in the wake of your ministry or the wake of your job, in the wake of your whatever, there was all sorts of busted up relationships, difficult situations, people whose lives have just been falling apart. And you realize because it was an abuse or misuse of the power that had been given to you. And you committed that I will never go that route again. I will never find myself in that position again. I'm going to be different. So as a response, you don't take any responsibility over anything. But that's not the solution. Because every person in this room has been given power. And we're not to do away with power. Power needs to be redeemed. God has given you influence. Not to do away with influence, but to redeem influence. God has given you ambition. Not to do away with ambition, but to redeem ambition. to make progress, to see things happen in the world that he's placed us in. So the question becomes is how do we use power and influence and ambition in such a way so as to bring about life, not destruction? Build up and not tear down. The answer is found in Luke 19. And that's the message of Palm Sunday, because what we see in Palm Sunday is the coupling of power and something else for the purpose of redemption. Question, what is the something else? Luke 19. As you turn in your Bibles to Luke 19, we need to see a little bit of the historical background that's going on here, because this is during the time of the Passover. And if you know anything about the Passover, it was an event that God had utilized in the Old Testament to bring about salvation and deliverance for his people. That the Israelites were under the oppressive hand of the Egyptian Empire. And under that authority, they were oppressed, they were pushed down. And God used the Passover to deliver, to save, to redeem his own people, to take them out of the bondage of captivity and slavery and into freedom. And there was this understanding and expectation that once again, that God would use Passover to deliver God's people from underneath the oppressive hand, not of the Egyptians, but from their perspective, the Romans. Because the Romans were the enemies. And so in Jerusalem, during the Passover, it was a highly charged environment. Again, there was an anticipation that God was going to do something. The atmosphere had completely changed in Jerusalem during the Passover. Historians would say that the population increased by tenfold. That is to think that Denver proper would increase in its population from 3 million to 30 million overnight. That was the environment of Jerusalem during the Passover. During this time also, you had the person that was ruling the land. His name was Caesar Tiberius. And anytime somebody would rise up to try to question his authority, that person would be quickly pushed aside. But because Tiberius' power was so vast, the Roman Empire was so extreme, that he had to appoint certain governors over particular geographical locations to assert his power in that place. And the person that was over Jerusalem was a person by the name of Pilate. And Pilate's responsibility was to push down any uprising of so-called messiahs that would come at that time to threaten the Pax Romana, or the peace of Rome. The way that Pilate entered Holy Week, the way he came into Jerusalem during Palm Sunday, was very different than the way Jesus entered in. Pilate was not living in Jerusalem. He lived in Caesarea, which was northwest of Jerusalem. So in order for him to go to Jerusalem, he would have entered from the west. Also, he would have come with legions and legions of armies so as to squelch anything that had threatened the power of Rome. And they would be marching under the banner of the eagle, and the eagle was the symbol for Rome's authority, its power, its reach. They came to kill anything that threatened their authority. Now, just the opposite is Jesus. And how Jesus enters Palm Sunday, how he enters Jerusalem, is going to tell us something about how we use power in such a way that brings about life. Because the way Jesus enters and the way Pilate enters Palm Sunday are radically different. In fact, they couldn't be more different. How so? Verse 28 of chapter 19. After Jesus had said this, he went on ahead going up to Jerusalem. As he approached Bethphage and Bethany at the hill called the Mount of Olives. We're going to get back to that. He sent 2 of his disciples, saying to them, "Go to the village ahead of you, and as you enter it, you will find a colt tied there, which no one has ever ridden. Untie it and bring it here." Now, Jesus is traveling from the east, Pilate from the west. We know that because he's at the Mount of Olives. Also, in Mark chapter 10, Jesus is at the Mount of Olives, but right before he was in Jericho. So again, he's traveling from the east. Jericho was about 17 miles away from Jerusalem. And he would have to travel through the dry and arid climate to get to the point of the Mount of Olives, about a half a mile from the place where his end destination was going to be. So the question becomes is why does Jesus travel 16 and a half miles from Jericho to the Mount of Olives, and when he's only a half a mile away from Jerusalem, he calls for a donkey? He's only a half mile away. Why does he call for a donkey? It's not for a functional reason, but for a theological reason. Because if he just wanted more comfort in his travels, he would have got a donkey in Jericho, but he doesn't. He walks on foot for 16 and a half miles until he gets to the Garden of Gethsemane. Now, to give you an idea of where he would have been, this is a picture that I took when I was in Israel over the summer. And this is, if you're sitting in Garden of Gethsemane and you're looking out towards the Dome of the Rock, right there with that gold top ceiling, that's the Dome of the Rock. And right in front of you here, those little whitewashed tombs. You could just imagine Jesus as he's on the southern steps there. He's looking out at the whitewashed tombs as he preaches in Matthew 23:23. He says, you Pharisees, you religious leaders, you are like whitewashed tombs. You can just picture him pointing at those whitewashed tombs. But notice, just right down and through the Kidron Valley going up towards the Temple Mount, that's all he would have had to travel. So why does he go 16 and a half miles? He gets right here, and then he calls for a donkey. Next slide. This is kind of the same thing, but just a little bit to the right. What's circled there is the East Gate, because it was understood that the Messiah was going to come from the east and go through the East Gate or the Gate Beautiful, because that was the closest gate to the Temple Mount. The Dome of the Rock was the place historically thought to be the place where Abraham was going to be sacrificing Isaac, or where Solomon's original temple was. And so to get there, you would go through the East Gate. And the Jews were anticipating that the Messiah would come from the east and go through the East Gate. So we put all of these things together. Pilate comes from the west, Jesus comes from the east. Pilate comes with a legion of armies, Jesus comes with just a few disciples. Pilate comes to kill anybody who oppresses or comes to set up their authority against the Roman world. Jesus comes to be killed to redeem all of humanity. Everything about Jesus and how he enters into Holy Week is completely different than how Pilate enters. But the question remains, why does Jesus, the last half a mile, ride a donkey? Why does he do it? What is he trying to communicate? Let's keep reading. Verse 31, if anyone asks you, why are you untying it? Say, the Lord needs it. Now, up until this point and after, the word tie or untied is mentioned 5 times, and that's significant, mentioned 5 times in these few verses. Verse 32. Those who were sent ahead went and found it just as he had told them. As they were untying the colt, its owner asked them, why are you untying the colt? They replied, the Lord needs it. They brought it to Jesus, threw their cloaks on the colt, and put Jesus on it. As he went along, people spread their cloaks on the road. When he came near to the place where the road goes down the Mount of Olives, the whole crowd of disciples began joyfully praising God in loud voices for all of the miracles that they had seen. And in this moment, we begin to realize why Jesus comes into Jerusalem riding on a donkey. It's the answer to what needs to be coupled with the power and the influence that God has placed in us. It's found in 3 distinct ways. The reason why Jesus is riding a colt is because it's a fulfillment of 3 particular prophecies. First, in Genesis 49, the reason why you have the tie, the untie, tie, untie, it's hearkening back to Genesis chapter 49, where it was proclaimed that their king, that the Messiah that would deliver God's people would be tethered to a vine, be tied to a vine. So it's the fulfillment of that prophecy. You also have in 1 Kings chapter 1, David's son, Solomon, coming into Jerusalem as he's being crowned king. So the king, the son of David, the king of Jerusalem, enters in on a donkey. So now you have Jesus, who's also David's son, riding into Jerusalem on a donkey. But probably most clear is the fulfillment of the prophecy spoken through Zechariah chapter 9, verse 9 says, rejoice greatly, daughter Zion. Shout, daughter Jerusalem. See, your king comes to you, righteous and victorious, humble, and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. Jesus came in humility. He had power. He has power. He's the King of Kings. He's the one that created all things by a word. And yet he comes in humility. Every person here has been given authority. Every person here has been given power. But we're to couple that power with humility. As we are Christ's followers, we not only follow in the footsteps of Christ, but we have the same spirit that raised Christ from the dead. And as we walk in step with him, united to Christ, so also we couple the aspirations, the influence, and the power that we have been given with humility. With humility. Notice, let's keep reading, because the question becomes is what is humility? What is it? And why is it so powerful? You look at verse 38. What is humility? This is the hymn. Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord. This is what they're singing. fulfillment of Psalm 118. Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord. Peace in heaven and glory in the highest. Question, when they say blessed is the King, who is the King? Jesus. But notice, it doesn't say blessed is the King who comes in the King's name. It says blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord. Now Jesus is God, absolutely. But what's happening there? All throughout Jesus' ministry, he's never pointing to his own life. He's always pointing to the Father. In John chapter 12, he says, I live my life for the glory of the Father. The Garden of Gethsemane, not my will, but your will be done. May all of this be done for the glory of the Father. Jesus comes, he is the King, but he doesn't come in his name primarily. It's for the glory of the Father, which points to the definition of what humility is. In Jesus' life, he looks up to the Father before looking out to others, and especially before looking at himself. He's always doing that. He's always looking up. He looks up before he looks out and before he looks in. Notice what else he does in verse 41. As he approached Jerusalem and saw the city, he wept over it, and he said, if even you had known on this day what would bring you peace, but now it is hidden from your eyes. Jesus comes into Jerusalem and he weeps. Not because he thinks about the flogging that he's going to endure, not because of the cross that he's going to bear, not because of his crucifixion as he is stripped naked, humiliated before the eyes of everybody that is there. He doesn't think about all of that. He does not weep for himself. He weeps for those who do not recognize that he is the Messiah. Humility is looking up to the Lord. Before looking out, he looks out to others, but he looks up first, and then he looks out to others before he looks at himself. And that's the essence, that's the definition of what humility is. Humility has everything to do with what we are looking at. Self-centeredness, selfishness, arrogance, pride is looking at self before looking up. Arrogance and pride is even looking out to others before we look up. And I'm going to explain that in just a second. But self-centeredness either is looking at self first or others first, surprisingly enough. The definition of humility is only and always looking up before looking out, before looking in. Andrew Murray says this in his book, Humility. Humility is the displacement of self before the enthronement of God. Humility is the displacement of self before looking, or by the enthronement of God. We're moving self out of the center and putting Jesus at the center. Now, this is so important. This is so important and countercultural to the environment in which we live. If we wonder why there's so much anxiety in our life, it's because oftentimes we're posturing ourselves to receive affirmation, to receive accolades, because our ego is so shaky. If we don't look up first, we have a shaky self, which means we'll always try to gather applause and affirmation from others because inside we don't feel very good. We continue to draw attention to self because we don't feel good about self. Tim Keller uses a great illustration. He says, if I was to come into this room, he says, man, my elbows, they feel great. I mean, look at this. Look at these elbows. Don't they look great? I can move my arm this way and I can move my arm that way. It's phenomenal, these elbows. You'd think, well, that's kind of weird. And the only reason why he would be talking about his elbows is if there was a time in the not too distant past where his elbows didn't work. That's the only reason why I would be calling attention to my elbows, is if there was at some point my elbows did not work. And the reason why we're continually trying to draw attention to ourselves is because we know in the heart of hearts that we don't work when we look to self. If we want to find ourselves, we don't look to self, because you look to self, self doesn't know self. You have to look something beyond self in order to understand self. And this is counterculture to the world in which we live. Everything is about self. If you want to understand self, you have to actualize self. You need to look more into who you are in order to find who you are. And God says, no, it's just the opposite. If you want to know you, you need to die to you. Look up to me, and I will find you. It's completely countercultural. When you think about it, I did the research. 2018, there was 93 million selfies taken and posted on the internet. 93 million. Now, it used to be in the day where you had a camera to take pictures of other people. We take more pictures of self than we do of other people. Now, you may be in this room and say, well, that's why I don't take selfies. But let me ask you a question. When you look at a picture and you're in it, who's the first person that you look at? Everybody may have their eyes closed. Uncle Fred could have his face chopped off because of the way it's cropped. But you're smiling. You look good. You think, well, that's a great picture. We should use that as a Christmas card. Everybody else is like, are you kidding me? That looks great. Why? Because the only thing we're looking at is ourselves. When we post things on Instagram or Facebook, what do we post? Not the despairing things. We post the great things that are happening in our life, the trips that we're taking, the promotions that we get. I just want to say, my week was so great. I got a promotion. I got a raise. So many good things are happening in my direction. I'm so thankful to the Lord. Hashtag so humbled by all of this. Talking about your accolades, all the great things that you're doing. Hashtag so humbled. What? We're prone to self. That's where we gravitate towards. That's what we look to. And that's why Lewis Smedes says, pride, in the religious sense, is the arrogant refusal to let God be God. It is to grab God's status for oneself. We suspect that we lack the power to become what our pride makes us think we are. So we learn to swagger, to bluff, to use symbols to cover up our fears that we lack substance. We force other people to act as buttresses for our shaky ego, that pride created by emptying our soul of God. Vanity is emptiness. A person who is empty at the center of life is vain, and a vain person is almost always arrogant. Every new situation calls forth the question, what can I get out of this to support the need of my ego for power and applause? As he encounters new people, he wonders, how can this person contribute to my need for applause and power? Life becomes a campaign to use people because we cannot keep our balance spiritually. We are empty at the center. We are empty at the center. And as a result, we'll try to draw all sorts of applause and affirmation and attention our way because we know deep inside of our hearts we're empty. Now, it's also true that it's not a lack of humility comes not only from looking at self first, but it also comes from looking at others first. Because the question is why do we look at others? So that we can compare ourselves to other people. And that's why C.S. Lewis says that the essence of pride is comparison. This is what he says. Pride gets no pleasure out of having something, only out of having more of it than the next person. It is the comparison that makes you proud. The pleasure of being above the rest. Once the element of competition is gone, pride is gone. What he says is this. We don't take pleasure in being thin. We take pleasure in being thinner. We don't take pleasure in being rich. We take pleasure in being richer, comparing our life to others. It's good to be fast. It's better to be faster. It's not good enough to be known. We want to be knowner, more popular, a greater reputation than the people that are around us. It's not enough just to possess these things. In the pride of our hearts, we want to possess these things in greater proportion than those people that are around us. So therefore, a lack of humility always focuses on self before looking up, or focuses on others before looking up. It's only humility as we look up before looking out to others or to ourselves. And notice how freeing this is. I mean, we can live a life of generosity. If we look up first before looking out, we can live a life of generosity because we realize that all of our riches are found in Him. We can be passed over because we know that the only eyes of approval that really, really matter in life are the eyes of the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, and He's given us that. We can be free from being defensive. We don't always have the posture of saying, I've been sinned against, I've been sinned against, I've been sinned against. We can have the posture of forgiveness because we recognize that we are a sinner first and sinned against second. And because we serve a Savior who has forgiven us of our sin, we don't have to be defensive when somebody calls us out. Do you see? Humility is so freeing. We can live a life of just radical generosity, not caring what other people think because we got the approval of the King. Humility is always looking up before looking out or before looking in. It's so freeing. So let me ask you a question. I'm going to ask you 7 questions, maybe 8. To see if you lack humility in your life. First, people that are prideful bug you. And Lewis goes on to say, he says, pride is the only sin that can't dwell in the presence of that other of pride. All other sins can dwell with a similar sin. So for example, drunkenness, the sin of drunkenness, loves to be around other people who are drunk. Sexually immoral. Loves to be around other people that are sexually immoral. A greedy person loves to be around other greedy people because it justifies their greed. All other sins love to be in the presence of that same sin, except for one, pride. Because if I'm prideful, and I see somebody else who's prideful, and they're getting more attention than me, the attention that I think I deserve, I can't be in their presence. So pride cannot dwell in the presence of another person that's prideful. So if somebody who is really arrogant bugs you, or you're able to sniff out that sin, maybe it's because you lack humility. Question 2, do you feel passed over? Maybe you say, this person, my company, my family, whoever it is, I just feel passed over. They don't know who I really am. They don't know my capacity, the character qualities that I have. They don't understand the skill set that I contain. They don't understand my competencies, and I just always feel like I'm being passed over. But here's the good news. Jesus also was passed over. In his life on earth, no one ever recognized, they didn't recognize his glory, his moral beauty. They didn't recognize who he was as the second person of the Trinity. They didn't know his competency, his skill set, his character. And even today, when the New Testament was read, there will come a day when every knee will bow and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. When he comes again, every knee will bow, which means that before the second coming, there are knees that haven't bowed yet. There are people here on planet Earth that do not still recognize who Jesus is. So if you feel passed over, take note, you're in good company. Question 3, are you prone to sarcasm or gossip? Sarcasm always cuts people down so that I feel bigger. Belittles others so I feel more important. Gossip is confessing publicly other people's faults. That's gossip. So that they seem smaller and I feel bigger. Question 4. Do you find it just as easy to rejoice with those who rejoice as to mourn with those who mourn? It's so much easier to mourn with those who mourn. Isn't it true? You could have a colleague, a person on the same level of you in your work, or you could be on the team with a person. And if they've gone through a devastating situation, difficult diagnosis, something happens in their life, it's so easy to mourn with those who mourn. It's more difficult to rejoice with those who rejoice. Because if that same person, your colleague at work, they get the promotion, they get the raise, are you able to rejoice with them in the same way that you were able to mourn for them? Somebody on your team, they get a better time, they do a better job. They make varsity, you make JV. They're starting, you're benched. Are you able to rejoice with those who rejoice regardless of the circumstances? And if you can't, it means there's a lack of humility. Question 5, God answers prayer, but you're frustrated that it's not in the way that you want. God answers the prayer that you've been praying, but you're frustrated because it's not in the way that you want. Many of you all know that we've been in a relationship with Inglewood Bible Church, and we've been asking the question for the past year and a half, is it possible, because they have a small congregation in a large facility, we have a larger congregation with a small facility, is it possible, and is it in God's will for us to be able to swap facilities? So the bigger congregation can be in the bigger facility and the smaller congregation in the smaller facility. Would that be a great kingdom win? And we've been in conversation with them. And we've been praying. If you've been a part of the community meetings, you know that that's been a part of that conversation. And we've been praying for that situation. But the biggest prayer that we've been asking the Lord of is, God, won't you prosper EBC even as you prosper Wellspring? May there be 2 churches in Inglewood that are proclaiming the message of the gospel. We pray that both churches not only survive, but thrive. That's what we've been praying. God did answer that prayer. Last week, we found out that Inglewood Bible merged with another congregation. EBC didn't have a leader, they had a big facility. This church didn't have a facility, but they had a leader. And I'll tell you, I don't know the person personally, but I do know somebody who does. And this guy loves Jesus with all of his heart, soul, mind, and strength. And he's going to proclaim the gospel in the city. So the question becomes, are we able to rejoice with those who rejoice? We've been praying for the blessing of EBC, and the Lord has blessed them. God has answered the prayer, maybe not in the way that we want. And regardless, at the end of the day, can we say, it does not matter what our will is. It only matters what the will of the Father is. And he will answer our prayers according to the way he wants. Will we be fine with it? Question 6, annoyance at people. Are you annoyed with people? Lack humility. 2 Samuel 16. If you remember that story, there was a guy by the name of Shammai. This was right after King David was king, and he was ousted from his being enthroned by his own son Absalom. And as he's out of the way of Jerusalem, he's leaving with his mighty men. There's a guy by the name of Shammai, and he's calling down curses. And one of his mighty men says, I can handle this right now, David. I'll just cut off his head. He'll stop talking to you. And David said, don't do it. Why? Because he said, maybe, just maybe, what he is saying is a word from the Lord, and maybe I need to learn something from it. So let me ask you, is there somebody that's really annoying in your life? And it doesn't make sense why you're in a relationship with this person, but maybe, just maybe, the Lord is speaking something to you through this person that is annoying you the most. And the only way we will be able to receive that word is if we have humility. Lastly, have you made a vow? Have you made a vow? What does that mean? Some of you guys know that I went to 11 different schools before I graduated high school. My two most difficult years were my junior and senior year. I had the most difficulty with relationships. I had a hard time making friends. And I made a vow to myself, not outwardly, but inwardly in my heart. I said, I'm not going to trust myself to friends anymore because it hurts too much. And I made a vow, and it was out of self-protection. I wanted to insulate myself. I could be transparent, but I could not be vulnerable and trust myself to somebody else. I couldn't do it. And the Lord has been unraveling that false thinking, that false vow that was made. So you got to stop looking at self first. You got to look at me because I'm the healer of your soul. Have there been people in this room who have made vows? You've been hurt by an overbearing father, or maybe a father that wasn't present. Regardless, there's fear in your heart, and you've committed because relationships have hurt you so much. You'll say, I vow to never give myself in a relationship again because it's too painful. And you're insulating yourself from other people, which means you are looking at self first. And what the Lord wants to do is free us from that. And the only way to be free is to look up first before looking in. And that's humility. That's humility. Our ultimate problem is we lack humility. Ultimate problem. God has given us a promise in James. It says he opposes the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. If we are not humble, we do not receive his grace. That's why the lack of humility is the biggest problem we have. In order to have the rich inheritance of salvation, it only comes by grace. And the only way that we can receive his grace is by being a people of humility. We look to the King of Kings. He's full, but because of his love for us, became empty. So that we who are empty, coming to him empty-handed, could be filled up with him.